Peace of Christ be with you. Well, happy Friday, everyone. Yes, we made it. We've got some visitors here today, and we want to welcome you to Hope College. You're taking a look at us. We're very excited that you're here. Two notices real quickly. Tomorrow at 7:30 here in Dimnit Chapel, there is a gospel festival that will be taking place with our gospel choir and about 4 or 5 other choirs coming in from other institutions. So come out for that. 7:30, what time? 7:30. Second is tonight is the World Christian Lecture Series in Graves Hall at 7:30. What time? 7:30. Perfect date opportunity. What better? Go out to dinner, hear a fantastic lecture, then you've got something to talk about other than just your feelings. It's fantastic. And those are important. But our lecturer this evening, I'm very proud to introduce, is a man from Colombo, Sri Lanka. He is Vinoth Ramachandra, and he is going to be giving a lecture tonight called Unmasking Idols, the World Church as a Prophetic Community. And we have the opportunity to hear him this morning as well as Sunday night at the gathering. He is with his wife, Karen, they have traveled together. They've been doing kind of a long, slow, meandering tour through Europe and have just come to the United States. And so they're a little travel weary. But I think we can encourage them, don't you? So would you please give Vinoth a warm Hope College welcome?
Well, thank you very much for your warm welcome. My wife and I are looking forward to our weekend with you here at Hope College. I have chosen as my text for this morning's sermon some well-known words of Jesus in what's known as the Sermon on the Mount. If you have a Bible near you, you might like to turn to the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 5. If you don't have a Bible, it doesn't matter. I'll read Matthew 5, verses 43 to 48. Like I said, well-known words, but rarely heeded by the Christian church. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons and daughters of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brethren, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? So Jesus is here defining discipleship, Christian discipleship, as nothing less than imitating God. We're called to imitate a God who is in the business of crossing boundaries, of building bridges, of turning enemies into friends. We're called to imitate God's justice, which is based not on revenge or vindictiveness, but on undeserving generosity. Jesus tells us that God lavishes his creation blessings, the sunshine and the rain, on all life. He doesn't discriminate between the worthy and the unworthy, the deserving and the undeserving. And I believe that Jesus' words bear on two challenges that we face as a global Christian church today. Two challenges that are interrelated. First is a challenge to relate to people who are different to us. What is sometimes called the challenge of cultural or religious pluralism, or in some fashionable academic circles, they talk of the problem of the other. And the second challenge, the challenge of global justice. So first, relating to people who are different to us. To respect others involves taking the trouble first to listen to them, to enter into their world, to look at our world through their eyes, to turn away from all our stereotypes and our generalizations about people of other cultures or other religious traditions. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with everybody. In fact, the history of religious or ethnic conflict in Asia and in Europe tells us that it is not disagreement or argument that leads to conflict, but indeed the very opposite. Because where people engage face to face with each other, even in argument, they actually stay together. People learn how to listen and respond to one another, even as they keenly feel their differences. But it's the lack of encounter that results in sudden eruptions of violence. There are self-enclosed ethnic or religious communities that live side by side in cities for ages without taking the trouble to get to know each other, to engage in serious dialogue, in conversations with one another. And so it's in the absence of that kind of real encounter with others that stereotypes, wrong impressions, and prejudices build up. Fear of the other emerges, and it's never confronted by the leaders of the respective communities. And then in times of economic stagnation or political repression, weaker groups are targeted as scapegoats for the nation's problems, and politicians and militants on either side fan the flames of ignorance into mob fury. And that is why the best antidote to any future social conflict is to actually build bridges with people who are different. Many of us were following last summer the whole controversy over the attempt by some Muslims to build a mosque near Ground Zero in New York City. And we waited to hear prominent evangelical Christian leaders who are household names in this country, whose books sell widely all over the world, whose churches send mission teams to work in Muslim-majority countries. We waited for them to openly make a statement defending the religious liberty of Muslims in this country. To say that if we Christians want to build churches in Muslim countries, why are Muslims not able to build in New York City, in Ground Zero? After all, there were many Muslims who also died in the Twin Towers. I didn't hear any such voice. If you heard a voice of any prominent evangelical leader or Christian mission organization that actually spoke up on behalf of those Muslims, please let me know after this sermon. I'd like to know. How are we Christians different? The gospel offers us not only forgiveness, but a change of heart. And it's a change of heart that enables us to love those who are hostile to us. Just because Muslims may persecute Christians in some countries, it doesn't mean that Christians should therefore persecute Muslims here in America. Jesus calls us not to imitate the way the Muslims treat us, but the way that God has treated us. And having experienced God's grace, we can learn to be gracious towards others. The literary critic Alan Jacob of Wheaton College, writing of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the famous Russian dissident and Nobel laureate, says it was the Gulag that taught Solzhenitsyn that everybody has the capacity to become another Stalin or a Hitler. And Solzhenitsyn himself wrote, I quote, "The line that separates good from evil passes not between states or between classes or between political parties, but rather through every human heart." Secondly, Jesus tells us that God is committed to the flourishing of His creation. He bestows the sustenance of life, sunshine and rain on the just and the unjust. And therefore, to imitate this God is to live a life that's dedicated to respecting the integrity of God's creation, the human and the non-human creation. It's to live in a world of biological diversity as much as cultural diversity, not with fear or with destructive violence, but with gratitude and a profound sense of responsibility. If you think about it, the climate system is what unites us, whether we are rich or poor, black or white, Asians or Americans. And a fairly stable planetary climate system over the last 15,000 years is what has enabled mammalian life to flourish, as well as settled agriculture and human civilizations. The climate reminds us that we belong to one world. We are all dependent on the carbon cycle. We are neighbors to one another wherever we happen to live. Scientists tell us that today it is human beings who are the main shapers of the Earth's climate. And human-generated climate change is threatening the greatest collapse of the Earth's ecosystems in the history of the human species. From the poles to the tropical rainforests and the extinction of nearly half the Earth's species of plants and animals. So what human-generated global warming represents is nothing less than the theft of the global commons by the rich nations as well as the rich elites in poor countries. It's the rich who pollute the atmosphere and the commons, stealing from the rest of humankind their means of survival. The atmosphere and the oceans have become the medium by which wealthy corporations, governments, and individuals transfer their harmful activities to other regions and other peoples. And that is why, my friends, global warming and climate change is not just an environmental challenge, it's a social justice issue. Because the people who today are suffering most as a result of global warming and the severe climatic events that we read about every day in our newspapers, those people are the ones least responsible for it. Indeed, 1/6 of the world's population are so poor that they produce no significant carbon emissions at all. So climate change raises questions about human life and destiny, about our relationship to the planet Earth and to each other. It raises questions about selfishness, about national interests and the global common good. It raises questions about the dangers of a technological mindset in our attitude to the world, and also about our obligations to people who live on the other side of the planet and yet who are affected by the things that we consume and our personal lifestyles. Now, all these are moral and spiritual questions, and Christians need to be out there in the public realm addressing those questions with integrity. And that's what I'll be talking about this evening in my World Christian lecture. But the issue of integrity cuts both ways, and here is a double challenge that we face and which I struggle with. On the one hand, I meet people who are not Christians, say who are atheists, who are passionately committed to caring for this planet and its future, and also concerned about the kind of planet we leave behind for future generations. And yet these are people who'd say that we are here purely by accident as Homo sapiens. And I ask them, well, why do you then care about what happens to the human race? We, after all, are here by accident. That's what your worldview tells you, your atheistic worldview. Nature is indifferent to our plight. If Homo sapiens disappears off the planet Earth, the Earth will throw up new creatures able to survive at higher average global temperatures. So why are you concerned about issues of justice and future generations? So I'm trying to bring them to change their worldview to actually make sense of their commitment to social justice. But then on the other hand, we have Christians we are struggling with who blithely say, yes, we believe that this is God's creation. And God is a God of justice, and yet they are totally indifferent to what is happening on the planet Earth. They don't care about social justice. They're not concerned about global warming and other environmental challenges. And so with the second group, our struggle is to get them to change their practices to reflect what they say is their worldview. So our missionary challenge is on two fronts. We cannot separate calling the world to believe in Christ from calling the church to obey Christ. We're calling one set of people to change their worldview in order to make sense of the way they actually live, and we are calling large sections of the Christian church to change their attitudes, their practices, to start living out what they say they believe, so that the world may see the difference that it means to be a disciple of Jesus. Let's spend a moment in silence. And in that silence, may I invite you to respond to what God has been saying to your life this morning. Lord, our prayer this morning for one another is that you will so change our hearts that we may truly imitate you in loving not only those who are different to us, but loving those who are hostile to us. May the world see you as they look at us, your church. For your mercy's sake. Amen.